The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any host.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander, and I am welcoming on Ashton Slaughter, the editor-in-chief of the O'Colly, back onto the podcast as a recurring guest here. So, Ashton, thanks so much for joining.
Of course, appreciate you having me. Like you said, second time, best time, hopefully. So let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Sounds great. Well, last time I had you on, it was under different football circumstances, of course. Here there were several different things going on, but really it was, hey, we know there's new OC coming in, no, there's new DC coming in, know that Gundy's contract has something happened with it, and you're recapping all of that fun news from kind of in November, 1st December time period. But glad to have you on now. Talk a little bit more about Oklahoma State football, do some transfers, some new hires, and all that good type of stuff, as well as basketball and wrestling had to win this weekend, men's and women's basketball, and of course wrestling. So recap that as well here too, as we get later on. So Ashton, I first just want to ask you here, what do you think of the new OC and DC hires here for Gundy, and what do you think kind of led him to choose those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at kind of maybe what led him to choose about those guys, you know, it's two pretty experienced guys, two guys that have been around the block. So I think if that's maybe something that we weren't sure maybe going into it what Gundy was going to look for. You know, it seems like if Gundy maybe were to have been fired or if he had left or whatever, that maybe OSU would have had some interest in like Zach Robinson, right? So maybe people were thinking like, okay, well maybe OSU is going to flip to a young staff oriented thing, try to kind of research everybody. But then when Gundy stayed, it was kind of like, okay, well, is OSU going to have these young cats come in and be like, hey, we're going to try to bring some fresh blood in the program, or is it going to be, more experienced guys that Gundy's kind of used to it? And I mean, when you look at, the most recent, one of the more recent firings of Brian Nardo, one thing that you always hear in the coaching realm is you never want to hire the guy you just fired. So with Nardo being kind of young and Dunn being kind of old, it was like, all right, so what are we going to do? But, Todd Grantham and Doug Meacham, both some guys have been around the blocks. Doug Meacham, obviously, the OC coming in, from being an inside wide receivers coach at TCU. And so, a Big 12 coach that's been around the block. Todd Grantham has had stops at Florida and some other big schools along the way before getting here. And so I think that's one thing you're seeing is that Gundy, opted to go with the more experienced route. And whether that pays off or not, we'll see. If both kind of have pros and cons, it kind of seems like. Grantham last time, he was a DC at Florida. Florida fans, I saw pretty quickly after Oklahoma State hired Grantham, they were talking about how third and Grantham was a big joke that they made, how on third and longs, Grantham would always kind of give him up. And so it seems like the Florida fans didn't really love him that much, but you never know, man. I mean, obviously SEC football and Big 12 football is a little bit different level of caliber competition. So maybe, he really excels here. And then Doug Meacham, the last time that he was calling plays at TCU, compared to the years before that and after that, just kind of had some offensive production dips. Didn't call plays for too long. I think only a couple years. So kind of the same thing, though. You never know. Whenever you get another chance, you get some more years of experience doing other stuff under your belt, learn from other people, then that can always change. So I think that with them being pretty experienced hires, you would probably like to see a cleaner resume if you're an OSU fan. But I mean, if all you want is the experience and you're trying to rebuild a whole staff right now and bring in a bunch of new faces and you're like, hey, we can't really take a risk on any young guys, even if we take some old guys who maybe have some question marks on their resume, have some spots on the resume that aren't as clean as others, we at least know that we're getting guys who, have been around college football and have seen a lot of it. So if that's where OSU was going from, then I can get that. But on paper, the hires just kind of seem meh. But obviously, there's a lot of time to figure out until they get on the field and see how they are. But we just learned that on Thursday we're going to be talking to both the new coordinator hires and Mike Gundy. It's the first time since November after the Black Friday Colorado loss that we're going to talk to Gundy. And so I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting things come out on Thursday. We're taping this on Monday, January 20th. So the Thursday coming up, I'm sure that there'll be some things that OSU fans are hopefully going to get some answers about from that they've been wondering for a couple months now since we got to talk to Gundy.
Yeah, what's going to be one of your first questions you're asking on Thursday? What is one of the things that you're kind of more interested in learning about with these new guys?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. Like I'm I'm sure that there's going to be these questions about them, what led OSU and Gundy to hiring them. But still, the most interesting questions and the things that are getting asked up front, I feel like, are, what happened in December. As much as we've moved on from all of that and Gundy staying, there's still a lot of questions that we have and that we want answered, and there's certainly a lot of questions that fans want answered. And just a lot of things have changed since then too. Even like a revenue sharing thing, like Chad Weiberg sending out an email saying we're going to need X amount of money, $25+ million for just. I mean, a lot has changed since then, and a lot of questions still remain. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about the coordinators because we're talking to the coordinators after that, and we'll get to know them. That'll be great. But also, we kind of know what happened before their hiring process, and we haven't really got to hear about that yet. But I think that when it comes to the coordinators, first kind of questions would just be for Mike Gundy, what attracted them? Because like I just said, there are some spots in the resume that aren't too great, but was it just that experience? What was it? And then for the coordinators, what drew them to Oklahoma State in particular? This is a program that was pretty clear was clean and full house, and there was going to be complete new staffs. I mean, did that excite you that you would get to kind of build your own staff, or were you kind of, I mean, obviously they're not going to say they were worried about taking the job because they have the job, but I mean, there has to be a little bit of concern coming into a situation where there's not, really developed roster that you're going to be inheriting, right? And that there's going to be a lot of question marks, from fans and all that stuff. So I don't know. Although I'm intrigued to see what Gundy says about the coordinators, I'm more so intrigued to see what he says about everything that happened before the coordinator hirings. So.
Yeah, I am as well. And as someone who used to work for Oklahoma State and granted be around as an intern, the Oklahoma State-ness of, hey, we are Stillwater, Oklahoma. We're not getting the same kind of fans that like Notre Dame has, an outside kind of money that you're talking about with
Yeah.
influence here. It's like the $25 million kind of number. It's not a lot of Shane Gillis of the world who are also Oklahoma State fans. Gary Busey, but I think he went to Oklahoma State, right? So we're not getting like the peripheral fans for. And then on the other side for Gundy here, I think it's interesting for him to hire on an OC that fits the same kind of description here as Casey Dunn would have on his resume, right? You're not hiring a Casey Dunn. You're hiring a guy who's coached Blitnikoff winners, but you're hiring basically a guy who's a former wide receivers coach who's been with the program for a while, who's around the same age and that type of stuff. And then on defensively, went the exact opposite way. Brian Nardo could not have more different resume of a guy than Nardo here and Todd Grantham coming in as a guy who you just recapped here for us. Florida, granted Saints most recently here with NFL experience as well too. What are some of the things that you just are speculating here as why Gundy might have brought in some of these older guys here? Do you think it was, hey, let's shift the culture a little bit and let's change kind of the staff we already have in, because it's a complete staff overhaul, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think that's kind of the most intriguing thing about why Gundy did this is to kind of see, and who knows, maybe in the answer he kind of gives us, the answers he gives us aren't, and I doubt he'll kind of show all his hand on when he hired everybody. But I don't know. I mean, if I were to totally just guess, I would say that Mike Gundy and OSU probably know that this year is going to be really pivotal for OSU football. After the down season last year, going 3-9, winless in conference play, and then having everything play out after the season that played out. There need to be really good results, and with a younger team, less experienced team, a team that has a lot of positions that need to be filled, whether that's via, young players who have been on the roster and are going to get more playing time, or transfers that they brought in. They need them to be really good right away, right? And so I bet that they're hoping that a guy that's coached the Saints on defense, or a guy that's coached Florida's defense, or a guy that's been in the Big 12 for a few years, coaching TCU players on offense. I think that they're just hoping that translates, and that experience can really kind of thrust them into a good spot right away. Because say they went and hired someone like UNLV's OC, a younger guy, maybe there's a little bit of installation that has to happen, and big kind of first job for him as an OC. So who knows? Maybe they just wanted to rely on something like, hey, we know the season's going to be really big because let's be honest, if success doesn't happen this season, or at least more success than last season, we could kind of be having some similar questions that we had last offseason about who's going to stay. Do more changes need to be made? And then at that point, who knows what that could bring, right? So I would assume that they kind of know, Oklahoma State does, that this season is really, really important. And so having the most experienced people in Stillwater coaching the program is the most important thing right now, probably.
It certainly seems like it. And some of the of course, changes here in coordinators have brought in some incredible transfer teams as well that are either highly touted or at least I think they're highly touted. I have family who's ties to UCLA, as my mom's side of the family went there, and it's interesting. Two UCLA transfers, a Nebraska transfer, and an Auburn transfer. Like these are guys who are higher profile. Of course, these are also some JUCO guys as well too. Is there a transfer that's coming in here where you go, hey, you know what? That's a guy that's kind of interesting. Interesting they brought in a guy at that position or at that guy at that skill set or whatever it may be.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about it before we started filming here. I just think just the most interesting thing, the thing that's always going to steal the headlines is if you bring in a QB, right? I mean, OSU is really big on Chandler Morris. It seemed like Chandler Morris took a visit here, the former North Texas quarterback, and he ended up going to Virginia. So then after that, it was like, okay, well, is Oklahoma State still going to be in the market for a quarterback? Are they just going to now roll with one of the three guys they already got? What's kind of going to happen, right? But then they bring in Haas from TCU, and it's like, okay, well. That's a guy who didn't get a lot of playing time in Fort Worth, but someone who coming out of high school was a 4-star at Toledo, Texas, big time high school football. And was very, very athletic. His best thing, although he can throw the ball right, it seems like, but his best thing is just his speed, right? On TCU, he was one of, if not the fastest player on the team. And so like that's pretty crazy. Having an athlete like that, under center. And not only that, but also having an athlete like that under center coming into a quarterback room with a lot of young guys who probably feel like that, hey, now's my time. Alan Bowman's gone. Even whenever Alan Bowman was here, he got pulled for a couple of these guys, right? And so, two of the three guys that are returning, Garrett Rangel and Milo Waukee-Smith have already played, and then Zane Flores probably would have played if he hadn't injured his foot, right? So these are all three guys who have either seen the field or feel like, hey, I should see the field, after spring and beyond, right? But now you're bringing another quarterback to kind of throw another wrench into that quarterback room. And I would assume that as the spring goes along, I wouldn't be surprised if one, maybe even two quarterbacks, hit the portal when they realize that, hey, maybe this isn't really my job, or maybe I'm not really going to be in competition with this job, because the 3-man quarterback race that they were already definitely going to have was already like, wow, like we'll have to see who OSU picks. But now you're bringing a fourth quarterback, and that can just be a whole nother thing, right? So the quarterbacks are always going to steal the headlines. There's other really interesting players like a Sam Jackson, the fifth, who you brought up from Auburn, a wide receiver who's, I believe, switched positions and just a really, really big time athlete. Obviously, I mean, there's UCLA transfer, like you said, some stuff like that too. But the quarterback's always going to steal the headlines. You know how it is.
Yeah, it definitely is like that. Is it interesting to you at all, though, that the quarterback transfer brought in, like you said, speedster kind of guy. Rangel is the other guy who's kind of a running-ish quarterback. That seems like when we saw in his limited action, that was what either the team was trying to get him to do more of, or from the plays that were ran, or he just was better at it. I mean, he broke his clavicle on a 50-yard plus play that almost led to a touchdown there on that play itself. So do you think that there's kind of a trend here where Gundy may be going away a little bit offensive wise from, I mean, the Brandon Whedon, Mason Rudolph, I want to say Spencer Sanders, but not really. Spencer was more of a runner than anything, although he's second all time in Oklahoma State in pass yards too. So he did pass the ball quite a lot. But of course, Whedon was not scrambling. So do you think there's kind of a trend you're setting up?
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to be setting up a different trend. College football and how quarterbacks play since Brandon Whedon in particular, my lord, have just changed so much. I mean, you look at some of the best teams that were left. A guy like Will Howard maybe isn't going to scramble a lot. Now there's Riley Leonard, but multiple quarterbacks, in the 12-team playoff were definitely, able to make some plays with their legs and do stuff. Looking at the Big 12 this year, Levitt, we saw that in the college football playoff. We saw that whenever they came to Stillwater, Arizona State did. Sam Levitt was a guy who could run around and make plays with his legs. Even other guys like Kansas State's Avery Johnson, Jane Daniels at Kansas, I don't know, Sawyer Robertson at Baylor. I mean, you can kind of go down the line of these guys who can make plays with their legs inside the conference, right? And you brought up whenever Garrett Rangel was playing for BYU or at BYU in that game before he broke his collarbone. I mean, it was obvious, like, wow, Garrett Rangel scrambling has added just a completely new dimension to this offense that Alan Bowman just doesn't have. And I think that after a couple years of Alan Bowman, even whenever he had good moments, it was clear that, man, like, Oklahoma State fans, they got really mad at him a lot for throwing that ball away. And sometimes that was fair, sometimes maybe not. But What's definitely fair about that is that Alan Bowman just doesn't have the athleticism and didn't have the rushing ability to get outside the pocket and maybe avoid throwing the ball away as much and try to make a play with his legs. And so, whether it's Rangel, Flores, who's a little athletic, or a new quarterback like Haas Senji, who they brought in from TCU, obviously following the inside receivers coach now OC. Who knows what that could bring, but it could definitely bring a new dimension to Oklahoma State's offense that it's desperately needing. Because we who have all been watching Oklahoma State games the last couple of years have all seen that them not having a dual threat quarterback has really hurt them in times.
Yeah, it really has. It seems like when we had to not play Sanders or Spencer Sanders because he was injured, it all of a sudden was thrown into chaos a little bit. It was just kind of like, hey, this is outside our element. We're playing really conservatively, etc. And it just kind of no matter what, sounds like it would have been a tough deal overall for a guy to step into Spencer Sanders, who was, Texas Gatorade Player of the Year kind of rankings, and bizarre how his college career ends, in my opinion, but that's my opinion completely. Up to him what he wants to do NIL wise, that type of stuff there. I just think it was going to be tough no matter what, whoever stepped behind him. Looking through the rankings here of guys that we're bringing in, transfers guys and just guys who are on the roster, Haas ranks here pretty high in comparison to the roster on, 247 Sports, On 3, ESPN Rivals. Do you think that, of course, Meacham being his previous kind of coach there at TCU, do you think that is a good indication that, hey, he's kind of maybe in pole position to be the quarterback here when it seems like a really wide open room, or is there not much to read into in your opinion either?
Yeah, in theory, yeah, like you said, with Meacham coming, it seems like okay, like maybe maybe he's already gonna have a little bit of an inside look and a feel for what Haas can do. So maybe it's a thing where it's like, hey, he's already knows his strengths, and if he feels like he can build an offense around him easier than someone like Garrett Rangel, Zane Flores, Milwaukee Smith, whoever it is, who he hasn't seen play in practice, who he hasn't take a lot of reps, then who are we to doubt him? We haven't seen any of these guys really play under Meacham's offense yet, so he's gonna have a good grasp of what could maybe help his offense the most. But you never know. It's definitely, I would expect Mike Gundy on Thursday, if asked about the quarterbacks, or if throughout the rest of the spring, I wouldn't expect him to not name a starting quarterback this spring. That's not a very Mike Gundy thing to do. But who knows? Maybe if someone comes in and just snags the job and it's very evident, then okay, well, maybe something could change. But I would expect that to kind of go into the fall, the summer, whenever we maybe hear a starting quarterback. But for now, I just think that, like I kind of said, it definitely makes it more interesting because that the 3-headed QB room battling out in the spring was already going to be something. Now there's going to be 4, at least right now. Like I said, I would anticipate that maybe 1 or 2 into the transfer portal. But right now, it's 4 guys who feel like they should probably be the guy, right? And so that'll be an interesting thing to manage, but also to see play out as well.
Yeah, I got to say, I do agree with one of the commenters here too, that if Whedon played 6 seasons like Sanders, then he would have reset all the passing records too.
Yeah, no doubt. A little bit of the guys he was throwing the ball to, for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. There's a little bit of, hey, if he had Des Bryant for a whole other year too, and et cetera, like it just would have been just no matter what, he would have taken all the records away from everyone. But it's interesting that, in my mind, that Sanders, I wonder how Sanders' career will go down here, because you wrote an article here yesterday, I believe, for the O'Calley, mentioning kind of how Notre Dame and Oklahoma State are kind of intertwined since that game of Sanders coming back, having that victory against Notre Dame, and Marcus Freeman's first head coaching job there. And of course, that I think that is a very fond memory for Oklahoma State fans. But then Sanders leaving the way he did, having the next season play out the way he did, where, hey, you beat Quinn Ewers, at home. Granted, Texas is second to last time playing them, but last time in the regular season playing them, and then just the whole season fell apart. The game in Manhattan the next week, etc. But to talk more about that Notre Dame game, when you're doing this article here against, with, of course, seeing a national championship team in Notre Dame always surprises me because I never think they're that good. But of course they are. They have to be at this point. But with Marcus Freeman here as the head coach, what kind of interesting things did you take away from, hey, actually, this is who Notre Dame is, how they got here today, and what they've been able to do differently since Oklahoma State has played them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that now, um, I guess like you brought up, we can start here first. So, like you said, Marcus Freeman, Brian Kelly leaves to take the LSU job, and so the Marcus Freeman is promoted from DC to head coach. There's a really famous player. There's really famous video now of the players mobbing Marcus Freeman whenever it gets announced that he got the job, and like it looks like their training room. And really, ever since then, it's been pretty clear he's a players coach. He's had a couple really good seasons at Notre Dame. His first game, though, was the 2022 Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Day. Whenever Oklahoma State, won 37-35, incredible game, comeback victory. You laid it out, the whole thing. Spencer Sanders obviously played great in that game too. But then since then, Oklahoma State's had 2 down seasons, 1 up season. The first of those down seasons was pretty average, I guess. So maybe not a down season, but down season from the Fiesta Bowl win. And that was with Spencer Sanders, like you brought up, at the helm, and a really interesting legacy for him. Who knows how he'll be remembered? Like you said, you brought up some of the weird stuff that ended with his college career, leaving and then going to Ole Miss, not playing, getting some NIL money. If that's what suited him, then that's what suited him, right? But I think that you've seen since. Oh yeah, here's the video right here, a good one. But I think that you've seen those since Marcus Freeman, lost that game. And since Notre Dame has moved on from Brian Kelly, an older coach, maybe kind of like how Mike Gundy is, probably stuck in his ways a little bit, you have seen Notre Dame succeed really, 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 really highly. And like you brought up, Notre Dame, usually whenever they got in the college football playoff and these big bowl games in recent years, there was always the big joke about, man, it seems like they don't even play that well. Like what's going on? And I totally feel the same way. But this team just has a different kind of edge to it. And so I think that whenever you and here's the moment right here where Marcus Freeman walks out. It's so cool. But I think that whenever you look at the difference between OSU and Notre Dame now since then is one has had, a new person come in, breathe some new life into them. Marcus Freeman, I can't remember the exact year now, but it's in my column if you go look at it on Okali.com. He'd be, I think, the second youngest head coach since something like the early 80s, I'm pretty sure, to win a national title. And that'd be something. It really shows that this sport can be a young man's game if you give a young man the opportunity to do it. And I think that after December, when Mike Gundy was maybe going to get fired and like who knows what would happen there, I think that just when you look at some things and with college football changing, you're like, hey, maybe it's good to just breathe some new life into a program whenever there's expectations not being met. And expectations in South Bend are much different than in Stillwater, right? Expectations in South Bend are championships, and so they weren't meeting those, and so they brought in Freeman. But right now, expectations are probably a Big 12 title in the college football playoff berth in Oklahoma, in Stillwater, and that wasn't met last season. And then I think after this upcoming season, if they aren't met, then who knows, something might change. So I just think the whole thing's really interesting, how Marcus Freeman's legacy, really started with that Oklahoma State win. And here we are today. In a few hours, Marcus Freeman can win a title. And that's definitely something.
Yeah, I found your exact quote here and link in the article here that you wrote for the Okali below here in the description of the podcast here if you're listening, or if you're watching, also description here on YouTube. But yeah, if Freeman wins tonight, he'd be the youngest head coach since Danny Ford won it at 33 years old in 81. So yeah, quite a long time since then, I would say, just as myself here, a 31-year-old and was born in 93. Frequently when I tell people who I work with who are like 20 years older than me, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm 31. They're like, wait, you look like a kid. So it's just kind of one of those fun things to always mention to somebody who's, dad's age or whatever as well too here. If you're born in 07, you are driving age now, which is just wild to me as well. But kind of all in here. You're probably closer to that than I am for 07 at least. But adding more than kind of the newer stuff here that we're seeing with NIL money and the younger age demographic here being attracted to that, there's not a lot of Oklahoma State information here about how much players are getting, paid, all type of stuff. But why do you feel as though either Weiberg, the athletic director, or really Oklahoma State fans just are petitioning almost for more money? Is this being done at other schools as well too, where there's just kind of, I'm the Oklahoma State bubble, we haven't done it yet, so I'm kind of going, hey, what the heck? Our athletic director says we need $25 million, but every other school is saying that in every email they send out, maybe, and I just am unaware because I'm not season ticket holder for OU, TCU, etc.
Yeah, I mean the revenue sharing thing you brought up with Weiberg, that's a really big change that will kind of have a lot of colleges kind of scratching their heads, wondering, where they'll need to mess with allocating their budgets and all sorts of stuff. But when it comes to OSU NIL money in particular, in the Big 12, I mean, on 247 right now, Oklahoma State has the 8th best portal class of 2025, in the first in the conference, which took a lot of headlines because of the great players that they were getting. They got 7 4-stars, was Texas Tech, and Texas Tech, obviously in Midland, Texas, that's a lot of oil money that they could probably scrounge up to get some good football players. And right now, I mean, I just feel like you've seen it since someone like a Boone passed away, or since Oklahoma State really hasn't had this prominent donor in particular. But it seems like that as Oklahoma State keeps going along season after season, and a lot of sports, whether it's football, men's basketball, whatever it may be, aren't on the surface or to us getting a lot more NIL heavy prospects or whatever, that it seems like maybe, OSU just doesn't have this wide net of donors that we might think it does, or that at one point people might have thought it did whenever, NIL wasn't this big thing more than a few years ago. So, with NIL deals not being public, unless reported, we can never know how much someone like an Ollie Gordon or even an Alan Bowman last year was making for sure, even though there are reports out there. And, I could throw out some numbers of what I've heard and what I think, but what's important is that we don't really know, but what we can see is the rankings. And so we can see a Texas Tech as number 1. Okay. We can see a OSU as number 8, Stillwater and Lubbock. And when we're comparing the two, aren't all that different, but you're bringing a lot of great football players to Lubbock. So what's going on there? It's gotta be an NIL thing, right? And so I think that nowadays, whether that comes from the top down, Schrum, Weiberg, Gundy, if we're talking football specifically, you need to do more, then maybe that's what it is. If it's just about donors, and maybe donors are not maybe still understanding how important that is, who maybe that could be it too. But I think that fans, if Oklahoma State isn't as successful as some of these other teams like Tech, Colorado, who are been big into the transfer portal, if OSU isn't succeeding like these other programs, then you're going to have to realize it eventually. You just hate to realize it too late if you're an OSU fan, a donor, or a president, or a coach, or whatever. So definitely something to think about, just as NIL has been important since it became a thing. But year after year, season after season, with the transfer portal and those two being mixed together, it's just become even more important. And you see it in every single sport.
Yeah, I'd really say here, just to just echo what you're saying, and got a commenter echoing the same thing here. I mean, it's just not a huge portal of people.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go back to earlier what I said as well too. It's not like the Shane Gillis or like the fashionable team is the Oklahoma State fan base at the time being. Now that could change. I mean, of course, you've got a likely all-star in Cade Cunningham, Oklahoma State guy for a year. I'm sure they'll show a highlight or two. Pistons almost seemed like they were replicating our brand there for a jersey or so they were making. It seemed like bringing back the orange and black too from their bad boy days as well too. So there's some Oklahoma State fandom to be gained. Justice Hill is playing, this weekend here as well. So is Tylan Wallace making plays for the Ravens last night. So they're, but then again, it's we're not Notre Dame. That's 100% true. We don't have a movie about us named Rudy. However, truthful that movie was, as more and more I learn about it, or not. But we're just not that brand overall. And I wonder, as an Oklahoma State fan here, not even necessarily the Texas Tech, but like K-State's out recruiting us. I mean,
Yeah.
Colorado, of course they are. They have Deion Sanders, etc. But in K-State, can we not get, they're 4th in the on-3 rankings for Big 12. Baylor's up there at 3, TCU's 1, Texas Tech is 5, Utah's above us. Like, how can we get, we're 7th in the grand scheme of things. So I'm not trying to say, hey, lo and behold, we're Cincinnati down here at 16. But what do you think some ways are that maybe we could get back to that? Because it seems like Gundy's MO per se would be, hey, we found James Washington, who was a Winnicott winner, and he's a 2-star. And I don't think that exists that much anymore.
Yeah, I mean
Right?
that's just not what wins you games anymore, man. I mean, I think that they really caught lightning in a bottle with that 21-22 squad. It's funny that not trying to bring up that column again, but that was one thing I wrote about. Is that since then, like I kind of said in the last answer too, with NIL and with all these things becoming more important, you look at a brand like Notre Dame, what they're able to do, what their donors are able to do compared to Oklahoma State, which has a respected logo around the country. Mike Gundy after that game made it a big thing. We have a logo too. Our brand is significant too. Since then, their brand hasn't really gotten any better since that day. And their funds maybe on the surface haven't gotten a lot better. They obviously have. I mean, NIL's gotten bigger, and I'm sure more donors are donating. But you start comparing it to, the university in Lubbock, the university in Boulder, and the universities everywhere else around the Big 12, and you're like, there's definitely some improvements to be made for that. And so, what Oklahoma State can do is a great question. Luckily, I am not being paid to figure out that answer. But what I would say is this: is that with that tiny donor base, like the comment brought up, and like how we keep talking about, and the fan base being small and all those things, you need to be winning football games. If we're talking about football specifically, to get fans interested and even thinking about that. And another good thing would to be not ridiculing and bashing fans' financial status. That's not going to help you get money in the long run either. But I think that whenever we talk about the importance of winning games this season, it isn't just to help Mike Gundy's job status or to keep these new OCDCs and all these position coaches around now. It's for just the future of Oklahoma State football because there need to be some, it seems like, significant NIL changes, and the makeup of how they recruit people needs to change too, because nowadays, like you said, sometimes you can't just go find James Washington and Sanford or at the time a really good recruit like Ken Daniels out of Beggs, because eventually they're just gonna want a lot of NIL money if they know that they're a good enough talented person, right? Finding a Malcolm Rodriguez out of Wagner is really great whenever you can build him into something, but you got to hope that he doesn't leave after you've built him into something a couple of years to go do a program and get more money. Now, that's not what Malcolm would have done. It seems like he's not really that kind of guy, but those kind of guys are becoming other kind of guys whenever they see the kind of money that can get thrown at them, right? And so, there was great players last year on Oklahoma State's roster that allegedly, by just what reports said, were offered money, whether it was Ollie Gordon or Nick Martin or some of these other players, and they stuck around. They obviously bought in that Oklahoma State brand, but they've been around for a while. And so to establish, a short of connection with a recruit or a transfer kid that quickly to buy into the Cowboy culture just isn't probably going to happen. So then what you need to back that up is dollars, and Oklahoma State right now seemingly doesn't have enough of those.
Yeah, the one name that came to mind immediately when you mentioned Malcolm Rodriguez not doing that, but maybe other guys doing that is, of course, Mason Cobb, who was on that team.
Right.
And, is a pivotal guy on that team as well, too. And, Malcolm Rodriguez would have been in the playoffs. He hadn't injured his ACL like so many Lions players did. But, yeah, that's one of those guys here that I could definitely see. I also want to ask you about this upcoming season. Granted, ton of new transfers in. Have expectations changed from this last season was supposed to be it in my mind. I mean, you brought back so many starters. It was, going to success, yada, yada. But that meant that this upcoming season here in 2025 was not going to be good. It was going to be, hey, we're decimated from the amount of guys who've just seen the playing field for that many minutes. And of course, injuries changed that this past season. Guys, change of course, transfers coming in and out. Seems like we've done decently well in the transfer portal. How do you think the expectations have changed for this upcoming season, or is it really just too early to tell?
I mean, I think expectations change a lot whenever you make almost 2 decades straight bowl games, and then you go 3-9. Expectations are definitely going to change, especially like you said, whenever there's a roster overhaul like this. But I mean, if you look ahead at their schedule, the non-conference schedule, they play UT Martin and Tulsa at home. They obviously travel to Eugene to play Oregon, which that game looks pretty rough right now. And then their road Big 12 schedule is Arizona, Kansas, Texas Tech, and UCF. Home Big 12 schedule: Cincinnati, Iowa State, Kansas State, Houston, and Baylor. So, they aren't all world beaters. This is the Big 12. You aren't going to always have a Tennessee and LSU, a Florida, Ole Miss, Bama schedule lined up, right? But, playing teams who finished really well in the conference, like a Kansas who finished strong, a Baylor who finished strong, a Texas Tech who finished really strong, on the schedule, and then other mainstays in the conference, like an Iowa State, just made the title game, like a Kansas State is always going to have big expectations, right? That doesn't really help the expectations to be a little higher because, even whenever looking at the season, this past season before any games were played, looking at the schedule, South Dakota State, Arkansas seemed like maybe tough non-conference games, but most fans' expectations were about 9-3, 10-2. I think I picked them to go 10-2 and win the conference, and that's obviously not what happened, right? So then after that down season, you look at a schedule like this, and you're like, man, like what are they going to look like? So I don't know. My expectations, I can't speak for everybody, but my expectations are for them not to be that great. A pretty middling transfer portal class, which looks fine, but it's not, great. And then the amount of new coaches that Oklahoma State has, complete staff overhaul, and just all the noise that happened last season. They really, really need this season to be good. They definitely need to at least make a bowl game. They definitely need to, try and silence some of the noise that cultivated in the offseason, right? But I just don't think they're going to. I think that when you play teams like Oregon, Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas State, among other teams, it's going to be tough. And, a couple of those teams have only gotten better this past offseason. And has Oklahoma State really gotten any better? No. And so I think expectations have definitely lowered. But like we talked about, I'm pretty sure last time I was on here, and like I've talked about with many people since that time that I was on here last, the times that Oklahoma State's always, the most surprising, the best is whenever everybody kind of counts them out, right? And so is that trope maybe something to lean into this season? Of course it is. It's great bulletin board material for Oklahoma State. I'm sure they're not going to be a really highly picked team in the conference preseason polls. So they're like, hey, they think we're going to be this. Let's prove them wrong. And that shtick has really, really worked for them for years. But like we keep talking about, college football's changing, man. So how much longer can you, really lean into a shtick whenever everything's kind of changing around you? I don't know. So I don't really expect a great season from Oklahoma State. Do I even expect a bowl game? I don't know. I would really need to look down at that schedule a bit more, but I can definitely see it being close and maybe them missing another bowl game. But who knows? Since I'm saying this, they'll probably, go undefeated and win the conference. So, but you never know.
Somehow, some way, pull out 10 wins after the bowl game or something. Yeah, it just seems like that's the MO Gundy has. When expectations are high, it kind of falls, and when expectations are low, we kind of just somehow just rise above it, which I like in this essence, but of course hated it in the last year. And
Right.
hopefully it does not become more. Hopefully it becomes more of a trend that we just are better than what we think will be always. Overall, want to pivot here a little bit here and ask about basketball as well too. Basketball,
Okay.
we get a win yesterday. 2 days ago. Recording this on Monday. But get a win against Colorado, who coming into the game, Colorado has beaten UConn and Maui, and oh my gosh, maybe Colorado's decent or whatever, but then again, when I kind of recheck and look at it, it's like Colorado was 9-7 coming to the game. We were 9-7 coming into the game.
Yeah.
Colorado was not supposed to be that good of a team. They end up proving that they're not that good of a team. There were a lot of fouls called early on in the game 2 days ago. And I'm always used to recording podcasts on Sundays. So whenever I record on Monday, it just throws me off here. Sorry about that. But not used to have Mondays off is the best way to say it. But what you take away here, if there is anything to take away from Saturday's game, and any possible expectations changing for basketball as opposed to finishing kind of lower in the conference, because does that Steve Lutz up correctly? He is the guy, I think. I mean, he comes over well respected. He comes over just as well as Mike Boynton did his first years on campus. Hopefully that does not fade away whatsoever. I don't think it will. I think that's who he is, but it seems like the team's a little bit different this year, at least in MO, but probably not overall in talent comparison whatsoever, right? I mean, there's multiple guys who transfer out to blue blood schools. It seems like it might be a tough year.
Yeah, I mean, this team's much less talented than last year's team. Javon Small was just named Big 12 Player of the Week at West Virginia. Brennan Garrison's at Kentucky now. Eric Daly Jr. is at UCLA. They lost a lot of talent last year whenever Mike Boynton got fired. I mean, and so acting like this team is nearly as talented whenever it was really pieced together. Bryce Thompson's still here, but be brought in a Devo Davis from Arkansas, Abu Usman from Xavier. It was really pieced together, right? And so I think that starting with Steve Lutz, I mean, I don't put any blame on Steve Lutz for this team right now. I think that these aren't truly his guys. There's guys because he brought him in, but these aren't guys that he's recruited since high school, or guys that when he's had a bunch of high school recruits on the team, have brought in a couple portal guys, picked a couple of them up around the country. These are guys. This is a thrown together roster, and I think that the good thing about Oklahoma State, although it has lost several games this year, whenever it's played better Big 12 teams, it's lost. I think that the good thing is that you're seeing like a Colorado, like a Kansas State, even going back to non-conference play, or Roberts Charleston State, Tulsa, Seton Hall, whatever. Really, aside from the FAU game, they have beat all the teams that they should beat. And the FAU game, they should have won that game too. And so I think that a good thing is one thing that you would see under Mike Boynton teams is that they sometimes would play up and beat some teams that they shouldn't, but they would always kind of play down and lose to teams that they shouldn't either. And so I think that a good thing for Cowboy basketball fans is that Oklahoma State under Steve Lutz hasn't been losing to teams that they shouldn't lose to, or no, they have been losing teams that they should lose to, but then they're beating teams that they should too. And so in conference play, even if you're just beating up on Colorado and Kansas State, and if you're not beating a team like Arizona who's coming to town for tomorrow's game on Tuesday, then it's like, okay, well, at least you're taking care of business in some capacity with a roster that on paper just is not that talented. And so, any OSU fan who's discouraged by Steve Lutz's first year with Big 12 conference play starting, I would really, really pump the brakes. I think that Steve Lutz, I think that the on-court product may not look a lot better, but I think that you also have to compare the talent, right? And so the talent's definitely lessened. The product might be kind of similar, but I think that give Steve Lutz a couple of years, just like how Mike Boynton got several years here at Oklahoma State to bring in his guys and kind of construct rosters. You've already seen Steve Lutz's, gotten some high recruits, been in some top 3s, top 5s, top 10s, Oklahoma State has. So just give it some time. And, this is going to be a rebuild. I spoke with Chad Weiberg last week I remember the 10 basketball story. And one thing he told me that didn't make the story was we knew this was going to be a rebuild, bringing in Steve. Like, we knew this was going to be a thing. He talked about that at his hiring press conference, his introductory press conference. This is going to be a rebuild. We're going to make this place great. And so this is the first stage of that rebuild. And with rebuilds, there's another Oklahoma basketball team, the Thunder, who went through a big rebuild, and look where they are now, right? So I just think that sometimes in all sports you got to give it time, and especially whenever you bring in a new coach, you're trying to set a new culture. So just give Steve Lutz some time. But I think that this season, them beating the teams that they should beat is really kind of the best sign right now for them.
And I want to say too here with the KenPom.com or KenPom rankings here, that's who I go to for college basketball stuff here, and projecting the rest of the season. Might have some close games here against, K-State at their place, or maybe against Arizona State at home and that type of stuff here. But other than that, we're not projected to win another game this season. Maybe Cincinnati kind of at home on senior day, but we're projected to go 5-15 in conference and not do too well. So anything better than what we're seeing here from the projections would be an achievement in my book here. We beat the teams we should have. We lost the teams we should have. There's a couple that are like, okay, well, not great against Nevada. We let them score 90, but led is a strong word here. So I also agree here. I think there's a lot of stuff with Steve Lutz and with the team that when we get more time, and he gets more time, really, we get more time to see Steve Lutz, and he gets more time to go recruit in a full offseason to recruit transfers and whatever it may be as well, too, here. There will be some guys that he pulls and goes, hey, you know what? Let's see what we can do here, because returning 3 guys, and one of them's not seen the court too much in Connor Dow. The other 2 in Jamarian Keller and, of course, Bryce Thompson have seen the court quite a bit and played really well. But you're right. Just he didn't get the whole offseason. He didn't get the whole deal. And he comes over from Western Kentucky, too. So this is not like he took a step down and he's able to bring a bunch of guys from BYU, Kentucky, wherever it may be. But this is instead he was able to not really bring too much with him, and we'll see what's got next year. I want to also ask you here. I mean, you got a listener question or two here before we end out, but want to ask you also about wrestling here as well. What amazing win! I mean, almost selling out yesterday. Steve, I forget if it was an official sellout or not for Galgaraiba, but being West Virginia, it seems like we're just wiping the board clean here, beating everyone we can. Big 12 championship or bust is always something that I don't want to jinx, but is that true this year with wrestling for Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I think the coolest thing for me with wrestling, I've been the assistant sports editor at the Ocala, I've been the sports editor at the Ocala, now the EIC. So I've covered some sports ever, but one sport that's never been my main beat is wrestling. Right, I've never spent a whole season with wrestling with John Smith or David Taylor now. And so I'm kind of watching more so from the far than some of our reporters. And I think that, you're seeing just really a complete different philosophy of how they're scoring points. Whenever David Taylor coming, he said, hey, we're going to score points. That's what we're going to do. And whether it's against West Virginia or NC State, all the Cowboys have done is score a lot of points. I mean, yesterday they, in comparison, didn't win by as much as they usually do, but like, come on, they still played really well or wrestled really well, And so I think if that's the thing is, really the expectations right now, which are fair, I think are Big 12 conference title or bust. Obviously, going up to Iowa City next month is going to be huge. Seeing how they match up with Iowa, another perennial powerhouse in the sport. If we look past Big 12s and start thinking about national titles, Penn State's still Penn State. My Lord, I don't know if anybody's going to be able to beat them. But Oklahoma State even being able to be in that conversation the first year of David Taylor, I think is really, really incredible. I'm not surprised that David Taylor's having immediate success, kind of like John Smith in the regard of this great USA Olympic wrestler now taking over first job young. I'm not surprised he's succeeding, but it's still cool to see him do that and to see how excited Cowboy wrestling fans are. Because, like you brought up, GIA again, a near sellout. Maybe it was a sold out yesterday. I'm honestly not entirely sure. But, I mean, the excitement's there. And the excitement was there with John Smith, too. Don't get me wrong. But there's always a little bit more excitement, too, whenever there's a new guy and whenever there's a new face and the program's still performing just as good, if not better than they were under another legendary coach like John Smith, right? So maybe they have another legendary coach in the making here at OSU. Who knows? But all that's for sure is that in year one, David Taylor's philosophy of scoring a lot of points has ended up being the case, and that the Cowboys, like you said, are really, really good, and that it kind of does look like Big 12 or bust for sure. And after that, it looks like they need to place really high in national championships, or else it'd be a little bit of a disappointing season too. I mean, maybe not a disappointing season, but it'd be a disappointing, finish in nationals. So their expectations right now are definitely really high.
Yeah, you got to say, I mean, wrestling against Northern Iowa, who's an affiliate member of the Big 12, then South Dakota State, also affiliate member of the Big 12. It's kind of funny when it all works out here. Iowa
Yeah.
State's the first Big 12 member that I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the Big 12 guy. Oklahoma's an affiliate Big 12 member, etc. But West Virginia was ranked 22nd in the last, NC Wrestling Association coaches poll.
Yeah.
And so it's not as though they are like the fifth team in the country or something. And we beat them, we handily beat them. But then again, I want to bring it back down to earth a little bit on that, just because,
Yeah.
like you said, that Iowa matchup will be much more important here. And when I'm thinking, oh, you know what? Hey, we're third in the country, but then there is a massive gap between Penn State and everyone else. There's a massive gap between Iowa and everyone else. There's a massive gap between all three of us, including the top three here, but still is that gap between Penn State and Cale Sanders and everything, and then drops off quite a bit. Ask you here a question or two here from the commenters here as well too. Does the relationship with Mike Gundy, the one that he has in the media, kind of hurt in the way he's covered overall here, especially by state reporters and him making a couple comments? I know there's a couple times he's gone either where he's really asked somebody with the Ocali and the Ocali staff a question or two on a follow-up of what do you even mean by that? There's sometimes he's asked other reporters as well too. Just how do you think he's represented here?
Yeah, I think that whether it's Scott Wright, Jenny Carlson, Joe Massaut, the Oklahoman, or the Tulsa World having Tyler Waldron, Bill Haston, Barry Trammell, to even the Ocali, our crew, the Silver News Press, whoever else. I think that local and national media have a fine relationship with Mike Gundy, and I think that the relationship that they have is kind of the one that Mike Gundy kind of lets them have almost. When he's at a podium, he doesn't really give you too much. He'll crack a joke and use his charm, and we've come to expect that too. And yeah, Mike, whether it's kind of a little response he'll have at someone, or a couple years ago telling Marshall Scott of PFB, who I should have said earlier too, because he's so good. After the bowl game, him saying, cut that out, might have to, insinuating that he might have to take his credential away, or even in 07, I'm a man, I'm 40, the big Jenny Carlson incident, whatever it is. Mike Gundy's had his things happen. He's had instances with the media where, I'm sure him and that reporter probably weren't on the best of terms at the time, right? But I also think that the reputation he has, I think, is pretty fair. I mean, you just think about Mike Gundy as a person, and he is an interesting guy, and I think that the media too kind of covers him like an interesting guy. Sometimes he's really up, sometimes he's really down, sometimes you never know what you're really going to get with him. And so I think that any sort of connotation that the media could be a little bit more negative toward Gundy may just kind of seem like that way because of how last season played out. There weren't a lot of positives for people to write, and so I think or write or talk about or read or whatever. But then whenever Mike Gundy and them have a really good season, The positives and things are always really high too, and people will sing Mike Gundy's praises for sure, just like the media did a couple years ago. So I don't know. I think it's a seesaw. And whenever you've had kind of a seesaw up and down seasons like the last couple of years, it seems like whoa, like these shifts are going from one way to the other. The media maybe likes Gundy, they're maybe hyping him up because of how good OSU is, and the next season it's like, all right, does the media not like Gundy? Is the media like down on Gundy? What's going on? I just think that that's kind of how it has kind of gone for Oklahoma State and Gundy. Public perception of him, even just within the fans, has kind of changed the last couple of years. So it's not just the media. I think that if you cover Oklahoma State, or if you follow Oklahoma State, I should say, how much things have changed too. And so we're kind of riding that ride just like everybody else. The only difference is that we get to try and be the middle people for fans.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you remember the Mike Gundy when he has a saxophone and he's playing kind of a saxophone or whatever before. I'm the guy in that video on the right here. That's clearly not the central character whatsoever, but Gundy trying to get him. And I feel like there's the wrestling singlet that he was in, the Big Daddy mug, and a couple of other things here. I feel as though that is much more of the Mike Gundy-esque type of stuff we'll see this year, as not a repair his image, but as more, hey, this is also part of Gundy's tenure. This is also part of his time at Oklahoma State too, where he is an Oklahoman, he is an Oklahoma State guy. I assume, aspires to have his name on the side of the stadium at one point in the Ring of Honor, not just as a player, but also as a coach here, and of course, more famously as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
With Gundy's tenure kind of being what it is here, he's had 169 wins. I'm curious what you think, just as someone who's followed Oklahoma State for a very long time now, editor-in-chief, going back years, just covering Oklahoma State. When do you think Gundy looks for maybe an out if he's able to leave on his own terms, assuming he is? Because this last season, of course, it looked like he wasn't going to be able to do that. And it became very close, it seems like, from especially the last time I had you on too.
Yeah.
But what if he's able to do this in his own terms? What do you think he sees kind of the line of demarcation as?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think some of that stems back from Big 12 Media Days last summer. Kind of around that time was when Utah's coach Kyle Whittingham and Utah decided to have a head coach in waiting, kind of thing. And so, at the time we asked Gundy, hey, like, is that something that you'd maybe be interested in doing? And he was like, hey, like, if I'm thankful enough, or if I'm lucky enough to have OSU come to me and ask me that, I'd be really thankful. He's like, because one day I want to be in the Boone Pickett Suite watching games on Saturdays. And this year, toward the end of the season, he was very adamant and clear that he wants to coach till he doesn't feel like it anymore. Kind of the wheels fall off. And so I don't know. There's two ways to go about that. One, Mike Gundy could leave on his own terms, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, however more long he coaches, if Oklahoma State's succeeding. But whenever you're not succeeding, that kind of can get taken out of your hands, right? And so who knows? Maybe say Oklahoma State has a down season this year. Would Oklahoma State be the voice of reason if they wanted to make a change? Would Mike Gundy maybe try and get ahead of that? It's all too much kind of speculation there. So I don't know. I think that really to know that would just to kind of know Mike Gundy. Mike Gundy is a pretty prideful guy, man. And so I can't really see him wanting to walk away if he still felt like he had some juice. But I also can't really see him just being cool with getting fired or getting kind of pushed out the door. Maybe he'd want to leave on his own terms, right? So who knows? I mean, this is all kind of the psyche of Mike Gundy, and like I said, just kind of the interesting character that he is. So I don't know, but I would like to imagine, just like any other coach, he wants to go out on top, go out on a good note, and hell, maybe that's this year, maybe that's in 5 or 10 years. Who's to say? But I think it'll be interesting just to see however long this last kind of part of his career is. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out now that he's 21 years in come next fall.
Yeah, I think it'll be I guess a real interesting deal here when he does decide to hang it up, just because he to me is synonymous with Oklahoma State football, but also I think that's how everyone has him as. And so whoever takes that spot, if it could have been, Zach Robinson, if it could have been some other guys here, it just seems like it would have been very interesting overall. And also for the Gundy perspective here, I was thinking about something earlier today here because I saw Nick Saban was talking about this championship playing tonight, and he's like a tie in his record. He's tied one game all time in his all time record, which it's like, how old is this guy? He's 73. So he won his first national championship when he was 53 years old. Gundy's 57. And in 2009 is when, Saban won his second one. I always like to bring in the perspective here of maybe the age that you stick around long enough, then you just have so many more chances at the pie to take a slice out of it. And also maybe there's the other part of here too, where stick around long enough and coaching college football, you will build up a program to a certain point. So although for all Oklahoma State fans, including myself here, as this past season was just a lot of agony when I'm looking through going, hey, last time I had Ashton on, we were talking about this, or last time I was making the graphic here of after we beat South Dakota State and previewing that game and going forth. I'm like, man, it was a different time. It was different
Yeah.
energy, beating Tulsa 45-10. I'd like to get back to there quickly, but also just try to go back and look through of maybe the best coach ever in college football didn't win his second national championship until he was older than Gundy is today. So yes, is Gundy Saban? No, not whatsoever. But the whole pain in his doom and gloom. I mean, if we're sequencing out year wise, this year would be for Gundy in age is the same year is the same year as Saban when he took over Alabama in 07, and of course loses to Oklahoma State. So it's just kind of the parallels here that you brought up of Marcus Peterson and Notre Dame here are also there are also some parallels between Oklahoma State and Alabama, who's 1-0 all time against Alabama until we play them again in the 2030s. So of course we got that non-conference scheduled for whatever reason because I'm not a fan of that game today. Maybe I will be by the time we play it. But Ashton, any other parting thoughts here? As thanks so much for joining here. But want to give you a moment here as well too, in case you have any other things you want to share.
Yeah, not really like I kind of brought up. We'll have some football press conference stuff on Thursday. Like we talked about, basketball, wrestling still rolling along. So if you want to read my work, listen to my work, whatever it is, follow along with our crew's work, okali.com, whether it's sports, news, whatever you got. Obviously, we can kind of be your one-stop shop for OSU stuff. So really thankful to Cal let me back on here. And yeah, it's definitely been an interesting time since he brought me back on. And so, but definitely excited to do it. So,
well, hopefully have you on here before too long. Not again here before too long. If you haven't already, the article for the Ashton wrote here intertwining Marcus Peterson and Mike Gundy here is up on the okali.com, and it's also in the comments here. I'll update it here in the description here right after we end this stream. So thanks so much for everyone listening. And the one other thing I want to say here is that the Remember the 10 game was this past Saturday. In case you don't know, I haven't been following the podcast too long. My father is the one who founded the Remember the 10 run. Something I'm incredibly passionate about as we head more into 20 plus years almost into the run here at this point. This is year, I believe, 18 or 9, I think 19. And it's something that if you are in Stillwater on the third Saturday in April and want to make an impact in some people's lives and get a free t-shirt and maybe some breakfast, come volunteer for the run. Or if you want to run, hats off to you. I've ran it once. It was, of course, during COVID when I didn't have any other volunteer duties assigned to me or wasn't trying to help out my dad too much. But want to say to everyone, thoughts are with those from the 10, of course, and it's always such a humbling experience being around them as well. This past weekend here in Stillwater, and glad we got the win for the 10. So with all that being said here, Ashton, thanks so much again for joining, and we'll catch you guys all again soon.